Today, Russia and China find themselves isolated, and many countries like India and Japan are going to work more closely with the US and the West.
So, in this week's column, you take off from the French election result. Emmanuel Macron has won, but not as well as he would have liked, or perhaps even people in Europe and across the world. A slender margin, and Marine Le Pen, arguably or certainly reportedly a xenophobic, insular leader, anti-Europe, pro-Russia and pro-Putin. So one of the things, just to start with the French election, is that do you think even within Europe that this is the signal that the sort of liberal consensus on Europe, the anti-Russia sentiment, all these things that we take for certain from the outside of a particular liberal order is under threat? And then how do you see them combating that? Because, say, Macron, who was trying to take leadership of the EU in some senses after Merkel, is now severely diminished in that regard, in terms of his mandate, at least domestically.
Yeah. See, I think, what looks at surface, that the whole of Europe is against the the Russian occupation of Ukraine. But within each country, there are politics, there are complexities. But what we have noticed in the last 2 decades is there is, across the Europe, there are forces like Trump's movement in America, anti-globalization, anti-regional institutions, and also fairly the ideas of strong sovereignty, the idea of importance of nationalism. These forces have been real, and I think what we've seen happen is Russia has exploited these parties. It has engaged with them. It has built good relations with them, hoping that some of them, if they succeed, for example, in Hungary, Mr. Orban has won his elections again, and Orban wants to be neutral in the conflict between Russia and Europe. But in France, if Le Pen had won, it would have been, after all, France is the central pillar of the European Union, and any major political change there, someone who's anti-Europe and pro-Russia would have had dramatic consequences. What is interesting is also the fact, in the old days, we still think of Russia as a champion of the left forces in Europe. Historically, the communist movements across Europe had deep connections to Russia, and there was empathy for Russia. But today, Russia's influence comes through right-wing parties, and their weight is growing across the region. And the French election pointed to some of the dangers.
You also point out in the piece that much of the piece is India and its growing ties with Europe. We've seen a spate of visits recently from foreign ministers as well as heads of state from Europe as well, from mainland Europe. How do you see that? You say that we've overread India's neutrality by saying territorial integrity is important. That is also, in a sense, saying that the Russian invasion is not. But how do you think, when do we reach that critical mass where what Europe is offering, we're already inking these ties are deepening, where Europe or the US or the West is offering, or what we are offering in return, when the ties reach that critical mass that we can say, all right, Russia is no longer, we can afford to be, if not condemning Russia, afford to be more straightforward in what we believe in these kinds of things.
No, I think while there was initially a lot of disappointment with India's position, but today I think there is a better understanding in Europe of India's, where India is coming from, its historic relationship with Russia, and its dependence on Russia for weapons, especially during a conflict with China. So I think the Europeans, like the United States and Boris Johnson, who came to Delhi a few days ago, the Europeans too. I think Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the European Commission, they're beginning to, engage that look that they can help India reduce its dependence on Russia. For example, Europe is a major weapons producer. If they're liberal with the technology transfer, if they invest in India's Atmanirbhar Bharat program and the defense sector, things will happen, but they won't happen overnight. But at this point, I think what is bringing India and the Russian question has put both India and Europe in the same boat, if you will. Europe is deeply interconnected economically with Russia. In India's defense relationship is interconnected with Russia. And both of us are trying to diversify our relationship. And I think that provides a very different context for bilateral engagement. The trade is already pretty impressive, more than $100 billion. One of the things we're now talking about a free trade agreement with them, following what we've done with the UK venues opening up. And they're going to set up a trade and technology council, which will at least give it a more institutional strength to India's engagement with Europe. So I think we're beginning to see a new elevation, I would say, of India's strategic partnership with Europe. We've been talking about it for long, but for the first time, the changed circumstances make it more urgent.
And so, and one of the points you made earlier as well, where it came out very well in this piece, was that even America's role hasn't diminished. That's one of the things that comes out of the Ukraine invasion. But at the same time, what America is perhaps looking for, or the sort of new world order, is more multipolar, in the sense that you will need a stronger Europe in Europe and a stronger India, say, in the Indo-Pacific and in Asia. How do you see that playing into the traditional sort of, the idea of multipolarity, as well as middle powers coming together within, which is an Indian ambition, an ideological strategic ambition, or at least a state ambition, as well as that in Europe? Do you see that coming together?
Look, I think the unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, I think complicates the, our analysis or thinking of the situation. It doesn't always clarify the circumstance on the ground. Things, from theory, things start from the top, but in practice, things start from the bottom. Like there is a Russia threat in Europe. How much you talk about multipolar world, I mean, the Russians, Russia presents a threat to Europe, and Europeans are going to deal with it. And America is helping them deal with it. In Asia, India finds a challenge from China, and therefore India is going to look for support. And in the past, we used to look to Moscow for that support, but today we are looking to US and Europe for that support. So I think it is these circumstances that drive. For example, India will continue to sit in the RIC and the BRICS forum, but what India does in the Quad ends up being far more significant. I think what we are looking this week is really, can we create more solid institutional mechanisms for India-Europe cooperation? Right. That is, US is going to play a larger role in Europe. But at the same time, US wants Europe to do more. Until now, Europe was not doing much and the Americans were doing all the heavy lifting. But America wants Europe to take more responsibility. Similarly, in Asia, it would like India, Japan, and others to strengthen their defenses, be more, more supportive of the other regional developments. So I think that's where it is a complex partnership model rather than unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar, that it is the challenge presented by Russia and China, and the partnership between Russia and China is producing interesting combinations. That is, while US will remain the principal power, Europe has to do more, India has to do more. So I think this is a significant variation on the traditional multipolar world model we talked about, which was really anti-Western. Right. Today, Russia and China find themselves isolated, and many countries like India and Japan are going to work more closely with the US and the West.
Right. And so everyone should read the piece. It's on the IndianExpress.com, and probably in the description where you're watching this video, it has a lot more that we've talked about. Thank you so much, sir. We'll talk again next week.